Welcome back to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, your go-to source for all things green and growing right here in Kentucky. I'm your host, Kristen Hildebrand. In today's exciting episode, episode 42, we're diving into a critical topic that every Kentucky gardener needs to understand, and that's invasive plant species. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Ellen Crocker, an associate professor in forest health extension from the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. Together, we'll tackle the pressing issue of invasive species, those pesky plants like kudzu that can overrun our landscapes, and bush honeysuckle that can threaten our native flora. These invaders are not just an eyesore, they're reshaping our ecosystems in ways we can't ignore. But don't worry, we're here to equip you with the knowledge to recognize these common culprits, understand their impact, and, most importantly, empower you to take action against them. So, grab your gardening gloves, get ready to dig in, and let's get to work on protecting our beautiful Kentucky environment.
Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. This gardening show will equip and inspire avid gardeners with tips and tricks to help them navigate the gardening world. The show will also highlight specific growing requirements for seasonal plants, so the sun will shine brighter over their Kentucky garden. And now, here's that ray of sunshine, garden enthusiast and horticulture extension agent, Kristen Hildebrand, with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.
All right, welcome back to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, and joining with us today is Dr. Ellen Crocker. How are you, Dr. Crocker?
I'm doing great. Happy to be on today.
Oh, yes. This topic that we're getting into today is definitely one that I'm interested in. And I feel like the reason for that is just in the fact that we do get some questions throughout the year from a lot of landowners. Maybe they're seeing some different plants, maybe trees or shrubs, different invasive type plants, but they don't realize that at first. And then they get into it and they're like, okay, we need to get rid of this, how to control. But to kickstart our conversation, can you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities as the assistant professor for forest health?
Of course. So in my position, I have kind of three main job responsibilities, which mirror those of the University of Kentucky overall, our land grant mission of extension, research, and instruction. So the biggest part of my job is to support forest health in the state through raising awareness, education, and technology transfer. I work with a bunch of different groups across the state trying to improve our management current forest health issues and to prevent future ones, or at least delay them as much as possible so that we can be developing some ways to manage them better in the future. Sometimes this is working with county agents like you across the state to help with local programming. Sometimes it's working directly with professionals, like providing continuing education opportunities. I host an annual Kentucky Forest Health Conference in February and a Kentucky Invasive Plant Conference in November, a great way for lots of people to learn more. And sometimes it's working directly with the public, such as through our Forestry and Natural Resources group From the Woods Today webcast program. Your listeners, if they like your show, maybe they could check it out. It might kind of have some other topics of interest. And another thing that I do is direct our statewide Master Naturalist program. And that's a great opportunity to learn more and get involved for anybody who's passionate about nature and wants to volunteer their time to improve natural areas around them. So that's kind of the bulk of what I do, but I'm very connected to this, and a part of my extension responsibility is applied research that addresses key forest health issues in the state. So I apply for competitive grants to research important issues that affect us, then employ a range of technicians or grad students through this to study a diverse range of issues. So we have a new invasive plant pathogen in the state, laurel wilt disease, that's killing sassafras trees and spicebush. And I've got field trials looking at the impact that this is having to our forests, fungicide trials testing the effect of different management strategies and other things related to how are we going to deal with this going forward. A lot of my research is related to forest pathogens, as well as some invasive plant work as well. And I also teach classes at the University of Kentucky for both undergrads and grad students in my role. So a forest health class going right now for undergrads, as well as one for graduate students. So,
yeah, sounds like you're really busy there, Dr. Crocker. And I do wonder, what made you passionate about certain areas with forest health? What got you started in that?
Oh, well, I've always loved the outdoors, and being in nature has always been a passion. I think I got started in biology just because I liked hiking and being outside and camping and all that good stuff. Who doesn't? Well, for me, I really enjoy those things. And then going from there, finding some jobs that were looking at forest pathogens, these diseases of trees. I happened to be in a place where there was a big outbreak of a major tree disease. And so trying to address that. That's what got me into forest pathology and forest health, but it also is what got me into extension, working with the public, trying to figure out how can we best manage these problems that are out there. So it kind of developed my lifelong love of extension.
Yes, you do a really good job. And I'm so glad you could take the time out to be on the podcast and talk to us a little bit more specifically about these invasive plant species. But can you kind of tell us next here a little bit more about the impact of invasive plant species and how it affects the Kentucky's ecosystem?
Unfortunately, we have lots of different invasive plants here in Kentucky. And these invasive plants, they are non-native species that cause problems. That's kind of what we mean by an invasive plant. It's from some other part of the world, and whether we introduced it or it accidentally found its way here, it causes a net negative impact. So we might have introduced it for whatever reason, because it was pretty or because it was really good at growing everywhere, maybe too good at that. But since then, we've determined just over time that maybe it does that, but it also causes big problems that we don't like. And the impact that they're having, it really depends. It depends on the invasive plant that we're talking about and where it's growing. So to give you an example, invasive plants come in all sizes and shapes. We have invasive trees like tree of heaven or Callery pear that can take over and outcompete native trees. They can form dense stands of nothing but this invasive species, which is not going to be valuable from a timber perspective. This is not going to be valuable from a wildlife perspective. It's going to exclude other trees that you might want to see there and cause some problems for, what you're trying to do. In addition to invasive trees, you've got invasive shrubs, things like autumn olive or multiflora rose or bush honeysuckle that will form these dense thickets in the understory of woods. If they're doing that, you're not going to see a diversity of spring wildflowers. You're not going to see seedlings growing into saplings of the future. You're not going to see the native shrubs that we want to see because we just have this monoculture of that invasive species taking over. And that can have problems down the road for, what's the future of that area. In addition, those same species can maybe fill in your old fields, in the roadsides, and other places. And instead of maybe those areas transitioning to more of that diverse forest that you'd want to see, you're just going to get a dense thicket of nothing but this invasive that you don't want, that doesn't have a lot of value for you as a landowner. There are invasive vines like kudzu. We all know kudzu, but others like winter creeper and Japanese honeysuckle that will completely carpet over areas, smothering what's underneath, maybe even strangling the trees that they're going on. And then invasive grasses like microstegium that can form this dense blanket. It's not going to allow a diversity of other species, or even invasive spring ephemerals that might pop up and look pretty for a brief window of time, but cause problems, reducing the diversity, increasing erosion potential, and other problems. So a lot of these invasives, they're decreasing the diversity of the plants that are present by taking over. And that can have downstream effects on the insects and their diversities, the animals and their diversities. And in addition, it can throw a wrench in your management goals and get in the way of what you want to do, whether that's, having a haven for wildlife that you can enjoy, whether that's trying to make money through timber on your property, or if it's trying to get out and enjoy your woods. It's a lot harder when you have a dense thicket of autumn olive that has big thorns and you can't get around.
I appreciate you being able to explain some of the invasive species that we do have here in Kentucky. And probably the one that's going to be coming up pretty soon here in the state of Kentucky is that Callery pear. And it seems like with it, it's pretty recognizable right alongside the road. And I think that one, seemed to be very popular back in the day, but then now it is just really taken over. You see it a lot of times whenever I'm driving down the parkway and along the fence row areas. But that one seems like it is really kind of, like you said, messed up with some of our other native tree population.
For sure. And I think that's a great example of kind of the challenge posed to us by invasive plants, because you're talking about Callery pear, which is a species of flowering pear trees. It's native to Asia, and it was intentionally introduced to North America, primarily what we're seeing now because of those beautiful flowers. We had some cultivars of Callery pear, and one cultivar in particular, better known as Bradford pear, that became immensely popular. Why? Because it had pretty flowers. It's easy to grow, and it grows in a lot of sites. It's not picky. It'll grow everywhere. It grows well. It's easy to transport. And those are all great traits that we like. And at the time, it was thought to have sterile seeds, because if you have a Bradford Callery pear cultivar and you cross it with a Bradford Callery pear cultivar, they can't produce viable seeds. But it also has some problems associated with it. So yeah, it has those pretty flowers, but it has this weak branching structure. And anybody who's got one knows that if the wind blows ever so slightly, or there is the crisp, icy frost in the air, you have a minor storm, it's going to drop branches, it's going to split in half. It's got issues. And so there's a lot of new cultivars of Callery pear that have since come out that maybe address some of these issues, just bring other things to the table in terms of the plant. But unfortunately, while they do that, they do produce viable seed when crossed with each other. So Bradford to Bradford might have been sterile, but not Bradford to Aristocrat or Chanticleer or Cleveland Select or all these other cultivars that are out there. So for a little while, we had this immensely popular tree, Bradford pear. And then we had a lot of other cultivars of flowering pear that, everyone thought was this perfect tree, but it started having its own problems, and then it started invading all over the place. So those seeds eaten by birds spread everywhere. So you'll see it in our old roadsides, in old fields, really taking over and forming these dense thickets. And when it grows there, when it grows in the wild, it does not look like the tree in your yard. It looks like its own separate thing, this dense thicket of pear with thorns in it that just has a totally different growth form, really dominates. And if you've ever been in a stand that's really thick with it, there's nothing underneath it. It's like barren soil under there. So it's really excluding other things that you'd want to see. And I think it's a good example of how, hindsight is 2020. Like now we can recognize that this is a big problem and we don't want this. And it's causing a net negative impact. But at the time, no one knew that. And they were just trying to find a tree that would be a good choice for our landscapes. And it seemed great until it wasn't.
I was going to say, we had a recent, it's not most recent, but several years back, it seemed like a homeowner thought it would be cool to have bamboo in their backyard for privacy. And then it ended up getting out of hand. And, it took them a little while before they finally got it controlled. And I know that's probably a little bit different, but, people just don't really understand the effects, the negative effects that it could have on the native population.
For sure. And bamboo is another great example in that bamboo looks visually appealing. I can see why someone would gravitate to it. And there's actually tons of different bamboos. Like when we talk about bamboos, there's a lot of different species and a lot of different growth forms. There are bamboos that are going to work clump. There's ones that are going to run. We even have our native river cane, our native bamboo. But when people think of bamboo, a lot of times, if they're thinking of that golden bamboo that's going to form these really dense masses of it that take over and move, very hard to contain. And once it's there, very hard to control. I've talked to a lot of landowners that really regret having planted it and did not realize how quickly that would become unmanageable. and how difficult it would be to deal with after it's established.
Dr. Crocker, you've mentioned a couple so far. Vines can be English ivy sometimes can get very invasive. And, from a horticulture aspect, can be very pretty in certain containers and looks good. But then, when you talk about tree canopies, it can really go down real hill. But do you notice other problematic, invasive species that are really kind of impacting Kentucky as well?
Oh, there are so many. And it really depends on where you're located and what types of systems we're talking about. In different parts of the state, different issues are going to be most problematic. And this varies by, are we talking about, wetlands or maybe stream sides or old fields or roadsides? Different things are going to be most problematic. In a forestry context, if we're thinking about our forests and harvesting of trees, tree of heaven is a major issue because that's something that if you have a tree that's producing seeds and then you're having a harvest nearby, what you need to see is you need to see the little saplings that are already there growing up and taking advantage of those conditions and, growing into those future big trees. That's the name of the game with our forests, is that we want to see that happening. And if instead you've got tree of heaven that's seeding in there, that's what's going to arrive. That's what's going to establish, and that's what's going to take over. Can cause some real problems. Similarly, something like microstegium, an invasive grass that you'd think this is just a small grass. How could this be a big problem? But if you're in a wet spot, like a lot of Western Kentucky, and you've got microstegium in there, and you maybe bring in some equipment, it has little seeds that can hide on equipment in mud and establish really readily. It loves those wet locations, and it can form this dense blanket several feet high. It's not going to allow for seedlings to be growing or other plants to be growing in there. It makes it really difficult to achieve some of your goals. Now, if you are in central or northern Kentucky, where bush honeysuckle is the top issue for our part of the state, a ton of that dense shrub that's going to form that understory layer. But we also see a lot of other species too, whether it's winter creeper that's covering the ground, that vine, or growing into trees as a vine. Increasingly, I'm seeing problems with some other species that are newer and you might not already have on your radar, but you should, especially in those wetter spots. Things like lesser celandine, which is a spring flower, a buttercup that you might see come up, and it looks really yellow and pretty, first thing in the spring, but it really takes over in some of those wet spots. Japanese chaff flower is another one that just really likes those wetter areas, but can move out of those into different sites. We have other species like porcelain berry that are becoming increasing problems. And then probably the two species that are present in more counties across the state of Kentucky than anything else are Japanese honeysuckle and multiflora rose. They're not new invasives, but they can still cause big problems where you're at. It just depends. Every different site is going to have different issues. So it's important to get to know what's out there so you can have those things on your radar.
I appreciate the thorough covering of all the different invasive species that can, like you said, depending on the region and the environment, moist soil, dry. The next question that it seems like people ask is, okay, what are some effective strategies to kind of help manage and control these invasive species? Because obviously they're not just one and done. There's going to probably be multiple things that you have to do, and keeping after it is probably important as well. But what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, if you could prevent their introduction or just contain their spread, that would be the best. If you can, catch something before it spreads and be vigilant about your scouting of new issues and eradicate them before they become a problem, that's ideal, and that's the best impact for your investment in terms of time and money. So just one easy thing would be to get to know what are the invasive problems, and especially those that are being sold or used ornamentally, avoid using those. There are great alternatives out there that could do some of the same things you want, but not be invasive problems when they spread out from there. But But for others, the cat is already out of the bag, and those invasive species are well established in the wild, and it's not going to be feasible to eradicate them. But nonetheless, you can still manage them to minimize the negative impact that they're causing. There are lots of different competing needs, though, for landowners, and no one is made out of money or has infinite time and resources to do it all. And I think the invasive plant management challenge can feel overwhelming to a lot of folks because you look at what you have and think, how can I ever have an impact on this? So I think it's important to be careful about spending your time and resources where they can have the biggest impacts. Thinking about, what are your goals and how can you achieve them? Are invasives getting in the way of something? And if so, what's the best strategy for addressing that? I really recommend if, somebody's got some acres of woods and is trying to figure out what do they have, how should they approach with that? There's some great professionals that they could be working with, as well as resources for technical assistance that might be able to guide them in the right direction. People like the Kentucky Division of Forestry and their service foresters or consulting foresters, or the Kentucky Woodland Owners Association, other woodland owners who dealt with the same issues. Just because you can't do everything everywhere, you've got to prioritize for what's going to give you the best results in the end. There are lots of tools in the toolbox for managing invasive plants, and each plant is different. So it's really important to do your research and pick the best strategy for the plant that you're trying to manage and the site that you're working in. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, unfortunately. Now, for many of the invasive plants I just mentioned, many of those woody species, you have got to kill the root system to get effective control. Otherwise, it's just going to sprout right back up. Because of that, systemic herbicides are an important tool for many in invasive plant management because otherwise it's really challenging to kill that plant without disturbing the site so much that it's going to be a recipe for more invasive plants. There's lots of other tools in that toolkit, and depending on what you've got and where you're working with, people manage with grazing and fire and other things. Now, all of these approaches, though, are going to be good in some situations and not in others. There are some invasive plants that you could really knock them back with some prescribed fire. In other situations, that's only going to fuel the plant invasion more. So it's just important to do your research and try to figure out what's the best approach for what you're dealing with. What's the best approach for you, what's feasible, and what's going to protect the things you want to keep on that site. So again, I just really recommend if someone's just starting to think about this, contact a knowledgeable professional like the Division of Forestry, a consulting forester, or talk with other woodland owners like Kentucky Woodland Owners Association who might have dealt with this before.
I was going to ask you too, Dr. Crocker. I know that you work all throughout the state, from Eastern's different from Western, Northern versus even more South Central Kentucky where we're located at. But do you have any specific case studies or projects that you've worked on related to invasive species in the state that you could maybe share some of those efforts with us?
For sure. There's some, and it's easy to get discouraged with invasives because there are so many of them and they're not going anywhere. So it's easy to feel like you can't have a big impact. But one of the places that I've worked with on invasive plants is right here at the University of Kentucky campus, our Arboretum. So our Arboretum has a small wooded area, and they had cleared out their bush honeysuckle, an invasive plant that we don't want to see. They'd done a really good job of that. But unfortunately, what had happened is another invasive plant had taken advantage of those conditions, and that's a winter creeper. So they cleared out the honeysuckle, and then winter creeper moved in. It was probably already there a little bit, but it really took off and just completely carpeted everything. It looks pretty and green in the winter, so I think, some people might look at it and say, there's no problem here. But on the other hand, this wooded area that's supposed to be a representation of Kentucky and the diversity of plants that we have did not have that because all it had was a lot of winter creeper. So I worked with their great native plants curator and kind of manager there and had some students out there as well working on addressing some of the winter creeper. They did some foliar herbicide spray of winter creeper. And winter creeper, anybody who's worked with it knows that it is tough. And it's a tough one to manage, in part because you've got these overlapping layers of vines, and it's just difficult to get all of it, and then it grows right back. But had a lot of success using a winter foliar herbicide. And the nice thing about that is that none of our native plants have their leaves out in the winter, but winter creeper does. So you can take advantage of that natural difference between winter creeper and the native plants we want to keep. Obviously, it's not going to work when it's cold or when it's snowy or something like that, but we get a lot of winter days when that would be appropriate conditions for spraying. And very effective control using triclopyr as well as using a surfactant and seed oil to kind of get through that waxy cuticle of the winter creeper. It's just an example, I think, of a place where you could go and visit and see what they've done. You can see patches that have been treated, areas that hasn't yet, but also how if you had taken a different approach, there are lots of other herbicides that would be less effective with winter creeper. You would not see the same kind of success that they have. I know that other people in other areas, though, have managed winter creeper really well, just pulling it up, especially in kind of smaller areas. Not going to be as feasible for something like they have with more acres. But that's one great example. And then something else that I got to tag along to and check out some of that is not work that I've done, but it's work by our great Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, is that they've been exploring some approaches to manage bush honeysuckle on a large scale. So they've been looking at aerial herbicide work using helicopters to really strategically spray bush honeysuckle during windows in which it has its leaves on, but everything else that's native and we want to keep has already lost its leaves because bush honeysuckle leaves out earlier and it keeps its leaves later. And I think that's just a really innovative approach because you can treat areas much more effectively. You can get a lot more acres coverage for a lot cheaper. That way, you'll still need to do follow-up and do other things. But I think it's just an interesting and promising new approach for our state.
I think it's interesting that you talked about the winter creeper there, Dr. Crocker, because we had a producer, actually a farmer, come in and he had left it on the ag agent's desk. And then whenever he did, she was out of the office that day, but it came back winter creeper. It had turned purple. And she said, I don't think I've ever seen it purple before. Because I told her, I was like, I don't know how long you've had your eyes on that, but that's winter creeper, right? She said, I've never seen it purple. So anyway, I appreciate you mentioning that one specifically because it does seem to be more common, throughout the state, more so than I think what people realize.
Well, and it's another one that, why is it there? Well, because it's an ornamental plant that people value. It's a great ground cover. It is evergreen. Some of it's purple in the wintertime, especially we'll get that nice purple color or a deep glossy green. But when it's grown as a ground cover, it doesn't produce seeds and it doesn't produce berries. So if you're keeping it like that, we could discuss the aesthetics of winter creeper. Some people love it, some people don't love it, but it's not going to produce seeds and berries. But when it starts to grow as a vine up a tree or over a fence or something like that, that's when it's going to produce flowers. That's when it's going to produce berries that then birds love and will take and will spread. And it can easily get out of control. Because if you've ever had winter creeper in your yard, you know how quickly it will grow and take over where you did not plant it. It's a pretty rapid spreader.
Yes, absolutely. And we definitely don't want that to happen. And that kind of leads into this next question that I have for you. Can you kind of tell us how the public can help prevent the spread of some of these invasive plant species?
Oh, yeah. First, prevent their introduction. If we know that they're invasive, maybe initially we didn't know. We had to figure all this out, unfortunately. But now some of these, we know that they're invasive and we know that we can do better. We've got great alternatives to them. And I think that that's something that people can be thinking about and considering. If you do see them, there are some great ways that you can report them. So you can report their locations on iNaturalist. If you don't already use iNaturalist, it is a great resource. They've got an app that you can use to identify different things that you're seeing out and about, different plants or insects or what have you. But they also have this nice website that you can use to see where are different species. And for someone like me, it's really nice to know where are these invasive plants, where have they been reported. So you can report the locations of those. If you see something new, something of concern, the sooner you can find it, the better the chances are that you could potentially eradicate it. There was actually a landowner a few years back who reported having this new invasive plant that had never been reported in Kentucky. It had been reported in some neighboring states. And let me tell you, we do not want this one. It's called mile-a-minute weed. It is an invasive vine that'll carpet over areas, which is bad enough because it's like kudzu, it'll take over. But it is also covered with these tiny thorns all over it. So when you try to pull it, it's like really painful. Like it'll dig into your skin. You've got to wear protective gloves and eye equipment. We don't want that here. And so she had reported it on iNaturalist, and immediately someone was like, oh no, we don't want that. Can we come visit and help you get rid of that? And myself and some other folks from the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves and the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council went and helped her remove that. It was just in this tiny little pocket. I don't know how it got there. I'm assuming maybe a bird moved it over, and then monitored it for several years to confirm that it was truly gone. So I think that's a success story right there as well. And then, there are some things that are just already widespread. They're already all over the place. And I still feel that local management can be very beneficial and help you achieve what you want out of your land despite that. Definitely prioritize management for when you can have the biggest impact and scout for things early and often. And then I'd encourage folks to plan ahead for times when invasives might be more likely. Like if you are planning a harvest on your land or something like that, that's a key window in which you want to get rid of the invasives that are already there beforehand. So things are set up for success down the road, because otherwise, if they're there, they're going to take off. They're going to be the ones that are going to take advantage of those increased light conditions and disturbance. Or I know in some parts of the state, we're dealing with emerald ash borer and the damage from emerald ash borer taking out a lot of trees. So emerald ash borer killing ash trees has also gone hand in hand with increased invasive plant problems. So emerald ash borer is an invasive insect that will kill ash trees in the state, and it's still working its way through Kentucky. But what we've seen in northern and central Kentucky, where it's been there the longest, is that the emerald ash borer kills the ash trees, but then the invasive plants that were in the understory take off and they take over. So that's another window of time when, if you can see that coming and you've got some big disturbance or some big issue headed your way, scouting for invasives and dealing with them earlier rather than trying to play catch up down the road.
I appreciate all of that. And I want to lead into this next part because you have, as far as education goes, for our forestry health, you have put together a really good field guide. And that is a publication that I think you all just released, I believe, last fall on Kentucky invasive plants. Can you explain a little bit more about that publication?
Definitely. So this is a kind of field guide to Kentucky's invasive plants that I put together with others in the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council, which is a statewide nonprofit that's just interested in promoting education about invasive plants and their management. So the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council over the years has put together some resources on invasive plants. And we had kind of a laminated booklet with information on identifying different plants and managing them that over the years we've been giving out. But it was due some updates, some additional species, more information. So we redid that resource and created this new extension publication. You can find it online if you just look for a field guide to Kentucky's invasive plants. But we also have physical books that you can get a copy of. And the idea being that you could take this with you, you could look through it and see how do you identify these different species to confirm what you're seeing, but also how would you manage them? What are some of the best management practices for these different invasive plants that are common in Kentucky?
And you all have the table of contents broken down really nicely. Like I know earlier on in our discussion here on the podcast, like you all have it broken down by vines, I believe, trees, shrubs. Is that correct?
We do. So if you're seeing something, you can kind of skim through it and see what you've got. I'd also encourage, if people are trying to figure out what they've got, is this a problem? Is this okay? Is this not okay? Apps like iNaturalist or other things that identify plants for you can be super useful, because then when you're out there, you can take some pictures, and those can be another great resource in your toolbox to try to figure out, what do I have? Is this okay? Is this a problem? Do I need to kill this thing, or is this okay? Yeah, that can be a challenge for sure.
Yes, it certainly can. And, in this field guide, I was skimming through it the other day because I thought this is a great resource. We'll definitely have to get copies of this, but the pictures are real top notch. So real high quality. Sometimes the picture really helps kind of connect, the dots for a lot of people. But you all have done a fantastic job. And I think, what did it say? It listed you as the editor?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah. And it was great, being able to build on all the resources that are there before, but also try to include new information about some of our invasive plants. And that's something that we hope to continue to add to, because like it or not, invasive plants aren't going anywhere, and we are going to continue to get new ones arriving. So even if you know every invasive plant that's out there right now, and I hope I'm wrong, I hope this doesn't happen, but probably in the future, there's going to be some new invasive that's going to become an issue. And so just staying on top of that can be a challenge, but it is really important.
Yes. I certainly appreciate all the efforts that y'all have taken on putting together that field guide for invasive plant species. And we'll link that down in the show notes for today. And I wondered, are there any other good resources that you would recommend? I know you said something about the Invasive Plant Council to Kentucky. Is that organization been in existence for a while now?
It has, but we are kind of expanding that and getting additional membership. We've got I think a new website that is coming out soon for it. Keep that on your radar. The Kentucky Invasive Plant Council. And anybody who's interested is welcome to join and just get involved and learn more.
Before we end today's show, I certainly appreciate all that information on the invasive plant species. And just to put a plug in from the woods today, I know you have a big hand in that. Could you explain a little bit more about that program? And we'll try to link that down in the show notes as well.
Oh, definitely. From the Woods Today is a weekly webcast program that our Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Group puts on. So every Wednesday at 10 Central, 11 Eastern, we've got a episode of From the Woods Today that's hosted by Renee Williams and Billy Thomas, and features a bunch of different guests from all over the state and beyond, every week talking about different issues related to forestry and natural resources and wildlife. Every week it's something different, whether it's me talking about invasive plants or tree diseases or what have you, to this week we talked about wildlife, lots of different topics. And that's something that folks can watch. Either they can join over Zoom or they can watch on YouTube, Facebook Live. You can get podcast versions on Libsyn. So lots of different ways to tune into From the Woods Today.
Yes, I was going to say, I've really enjoyed it. I like that y'all make the recordings available on the YouTube so I can go back and watch it if I have a busy day at the office. But that's some great information that you all put out, especially if you are a woodland owner. And like you said, there's a lot of myriad of different topics, seasonal topics. I really enjoy the Tree Week as well. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Crocker, for coming on the podcast and providing your expertise. And again, we hope that people will check out your all's field guide information for invasive plant species. So make sure to check that out. But thank you so much. And we hope to have you again next time.
Well, thank you for having me on and look forward to it.
That's a wrap on today's episode of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. While invasive plant species can persist, we can protect Kentucky's native landscapes with proper knowledge and actions. We appreciate your dedication to this important cause. Thank you to Dr. Ellen Crocker for joining us as our guest today. If you're interested in learning more about the new resource, Field Guide to Kentucky's Invasive Plants, Forestry number 177, please check out the show notes for episode 42. You can find the show notes over on the blog at warrencountyagriculture.com. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, we would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us connect with more listeners and improve our content. Additionally, feel free to reach out with any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future podcast episodes. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, keep your garden thriving and do your part to manage invasive species. Happy gardening.
Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast with Kristen Hildebrand. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts to catch future segments of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Gardeners, keep on digging and learning more about gardening so the sun shines brighter over your Kentucky garden. The Sunshine Gardening Podcasts with Kristen Hildebrand is a production of the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.